done when it comes to facing Filipinos. On Monday, July 27, he gets the chance again as he delivers his fifth State of the Nation address. But before SONA, some bad news to consumers and business. The peso falls to another new low, oil prices are rising again, and the U.S. is imposing fresh tariffs. The president's cousin and former speaker remains on the ombudsman's radar. An internal preliminary investigation is underway against Congressman Martin Romualdez. And a fearless forecast from a Duterte ally. He says Senator Robin Padilla will be president in a few years. Good evening, I'm Ed Lingao, standing in for Ces Dillon. We begin with President Bongbong Marcos's fifth State of the Nation address happening on Monday, July 27. His speech, now 90% finished, will trumpet gains of the administration amid pressing issues such as the Gulf War. But what do Filipinos want to hear from the president? They answered in one survey. All these in tonight's big story from News 5's Mon Gualvez.
Sahod, itaas! Presyo, ibaba! Lahat ng sangkot, dapat managot! Dapat managot! Lahat ng sangkot! Marcos singilin! Duterte panagutin!
Militant groups gave a sneak peek of activities they have lined up on the day President Bongbong Marcos delivers his fifth State of the Nation address. But what do they want to hear from PBBM? A lot on the wish list, including the junking of the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001 in a bid to release control of power resources from private companies, as well as the suspension of the value-added tax on oil and other basic goods.
Umulan man, umaraw, may pasok man o wala, tuloy ang marcha ng sambayanan, ilalahad natin ang tunay na kalagayan ng bayan. Marcos, Duterte, walang pinag-iba, lahat ng kurakot dapat panagutin. Dapat tugunan ng pamahalaan yung problema ng kahirapan, matakas na presyo ng langis at bilihin, at kawalang pananagutan.
As is tradition, there will be effigies for burning despite the PNP warning against such. This year, it is US President Donald Trump with combat tanks, with Marcos in his grip with the theme of puppet and puppet master.
Si Trump na nasa likod ng acts of aggression, panggigera sa Iran, sa West Asia, genocide sa Palestine, kailangan talaga wasakin yan. Na hindi pwedeng gamitin yung Clean Air Act dito sa ating pagsunog ng EPG. Dahil ang tinutukoy sa Clean Air Act na pagsunog ay yung basura. Ito ay legitimate na free speech, protected speech ang pagsunog sa EPG.
Pulse Asia's latest survey from June 28 to July 3 and 6 tackled issues and matters Filipinos want to hear and see revolve in this year's SONA. 29.8% want Marcos to address corruption and 18.9% expect to hear developments in the probe on the flood control scandal. Then, there are other issues on the wish list, lowering the prices of commodities, livelihood growth, and solutions to poverty and illegal drugs. When asked whether he will discuss the flood control scandal in his SONA just like last year,
abangan ang susunod na kabanata.
President Marcos said his speech for July 27 is already 90% finished.
Until 1 hour before the SONA, I'm still changing it, because of course we want it to be perfect. So, but on the whole, yes, on the whole, it's I would say the actual language is 90+% done. We're just fixing it up and making sure that it's not too long or it's not too short. That we have everything that we want to talk about is already.
But the chief executive confirmed one topic he will definitely put forth on Monday: the government's response to external forces such as the crisis brought about by the war in the Middle East.
I will make sure that people know all of the things that we have done to navigate this very difficult period in our history where we are buffeted by all of these external forces, but nonetheless our response has been good, and we have had to make adjustments, but those adjustments have been effective and have served their purpose, and I know that it has helped people weather this storm and continue to weather this storm until things hopefully normalize.
For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
In other news, Chinese Coast Guard vessels again fired water cannons at Philippine ships near Bajo de Masinloc. The Philippine Coast Guard says its vessels and 3 BFAR ships were targeted while on a supply run to Filipino fishermen. Aside from being targeted with water cannons, the Philippine Coast Guard says the Chinese vessels sailed dangerously close to Philippine vessels and created navigational hazards during the incident. Still, the Filipino personnel completed their mission without any injuries. Today's encounter at sea comes just 4 days after a Filipino sailor was severely injured when Chinese Coast Guard personnel struck a group of Navy men with wooden batons. On July 23, Beijing also fired a water cannon at a BFAR ship near Bajo de Masinloc. Will this latest water cannoning incident make it to President Marcos's report to the nation on Monday? And joining us now is author and geopolitical analyst Richard Heydarian. Richard, welcome back to The Big Story.
Been a long time, 24 hours since we last talked.
Just yesterday. Well, what do you make of this this apparently sudden flurry of activities in the West Philippine Sea and, of course, in Kiskisan between China and the Philippines in the past few days?
I mean, unang-una, meron tayong isang malaking konteksto, no? We live in a world whereby 2 out of the 3 superpowers are engaged in direct combat operations. So you look at Russia's war in Ukraine, which is not really moving in a very positive or encouraging direction. And at the same time, of course, you see the Iran conflict, which looks like it's getting out of control once again. So that only leaves China as the only other superpower, which so far has kept its powder kept dry. But that doesn't mean that China is not also going to push the envelope in this new world disorder we have. That's why I've been extremely worried over the past few months whether China will also fall for the temptation of using its massive military supremacy in the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. I mean, on one hand, you can say we're lucky that China has not yet engaged in a massive kinetic action against the Philippines or even Taiwan, which is going to affect us directly. But at the same time, it's very clear that China is pushing the envelope here, whether it's the announcement that they want to build an ecological zone in the Scarborough Shoal. I think they just brought their so-called media. I'm not sure how independent are journalists in China, to be honest, recently to the Scarborough Shoal. And now, of course, you have Chinese Coast Guard forces using violence against Philippine Navy officials, in spite of the fact that supposedly over the past 2 years, we have had some understanding around Bajo de Masinloc that, force should not be used. And let's not flirt essentially with activation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. It's quite telling that I think Secretary Rubio also mentioned that a while ago during the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, that an American Coast Guard was also, it looks like, just over the horizon and provided assistance eventually, which tells you this is not just between China and the Philippines, but this could potentially involve another major superpower.
So you're saying basically they're taking advantage of the other superpowers, or if you want to call them that, being so busy elsewhere.
Absolutely, and it's also testing Americans, how much Americans can sustain operations in multiple theaters, right? They're actively involved in the war against Iran. They're still helping Ukraine against Russia. This will be the 3rd theater in which the Americans will be involved if in case things get out of control. But then again, we see the Chinese using, again, a new shade of the 50 Shades of Gray Zone, right? So gray zone is when you use violence, when you use illegal acts, but just short of shooting guns or using missiles or even armed drones. So the Chinese keep on getting closer and they keep on flirting with the possibility of using actual violence or all-out violence against the Philippines. But as I said, this is a test of the rules-based order in our part of the world. And it's good you mentioned this. I mean, the timing is also important, right? This is the 10th anniversary of the arbitration award. I'm sure many in China would have wished that this never happened and that by the 10th year, the Philippines would have given up on it. And here we are. The Philippines has been more obstinately committed to the rules-based order based on the arbitration award. And here we are again, not only the U.S., but Japan and other major Western allies and democracies in the region and beyond also very much invested in the Philippines' rights and protection of our sovereign rights in this area. And I think that really rankles a lot of Chinese officials. And that may explain why the China Daily resorted to something that I think was unprecedented. I've never seen Chinese state-owned media so brazenly using such a disgustingly racist language against any smaller neighbor in Asia, considering we're all supposed to be Asians and mutually respectful.
Yeah, but why specifically this week and, these past 2 weeks? Of course, there is the arbitral ruling anniversary, but at the same time, you also have the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit, which makes it a bit of an awkward, the timing does seem to be a little bit awkward. I don't know if you agree, but and so I suppose this is going to be discussed at least behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a very important meeting between the Americans and the Chinese just the other day, right? Which tells you both. I mean, is this a form of shadow boxing between the two superpowers? I mean, what makes the Chinese also very sensitive about the Philippines is that we're also getting more and more directly involved on the Taiwan question. They're completely unhappy about, the Philippines granting the Americans more military presence in our northern islands. They don't like what we're doing near the Bashi Channel, strengthening our presence in the Mavulis. So if you talk to the Chinese, what they'll tell you is that it's one thing for us to have disagreements in the South China Sea. It's another thing for you guys to be directly involved or somehow directly involved on the Taiwan question, which they treat as a domestic national issue. So it's really the concatenation of those two theaters, Taiwan and the South China Sea, that gives it a lot of sensitivity. Having said that, we always get accused of, oh, are the Filipinos playing good cop, bad cop? Because, you have the defense secretary speaking a very
And you have
tough
DFA.
language, and then you have the DFA secretary, very professional, veteran diplomat. Well, I think both of them are just doing their job. I mean, that's what a defense secretary is paid for, right? And that's what the Malacanang was also very clear that the president's point of view is probably a synthesis of all of this. What I think is happening with China is the good cop, bad cop. So on one hand, you have the Chinese ambassador since earlier this year. Actually, I had a meeting with him just for transparency purposes in January of this year. He was very clear that he wants stability in bilateral relationship, and I felt he was sincere to the degree that I think they were hoping things are stable enough for paramount leader Xi Jinping to come in November, as Trump is likely to come to Manila for the ASEAN summit. But we also know there have been elements, including the foreign minister of China, who have been engaged in this somehow dragon diplomacy, right? Not only wolf warrior diplomacy. And I think this tells you something about debates within China. It's a black box. I think no one knows for sure exactly what's happening in China. But I think there are indications that there are people in China who are saying, let's test the waters, let's test the Americans, and perhaps that puts us in a better position to extract the concessions we want, both from the Americans and the Filipinos on the Taiwan issue and the South China Sea issue.
But let me bring up something that everybody talks about, but nobody wants to talk about. No, sorry. Something that everybody wants to talk about, but nobody is willing to talk about. The supposed 2024 provisional agreement between the Philippines and China. Now, the Chinese ambassador again brought it up. Of course, we've heard about this as early as 2024, but we've never seen any details. We've never seen the paperwork. We've never seen the provisions. So it remains a huge mystery. And now the Chinese side brings it up. And parang, so where are we here? And what exactly did we commit to? And nobody's talking about it.
Alam mo, kung titignan mo yung conflict ngayon sa gitnang silangan, no, doon sa Hormuz Strait, di ba? Ang sinasabi nila yung nangyari dyan is memorandum of misunderstanding. Iba yung basa ng Iran, for instance, doon sa issue ng coordination on the passage of vessels. Iba yung basa ng Trump administration. At kaya nga nagkaroon tayo ng basically gera ulit ngayon, di ba? Sa Strait of Hormuz. It is very possible, of course, very different context, but it's very possible na iba yung basa ng mga Chino doon sa kung ano man yung understanding na meron tayo dyan sa Baho de Masinloc, which, let's be fair, between middle of 2024 up until recently, walang violence na nangyari.
We haven't seen anything, yeah.
Exactly. At kung tinanong mo isang eksperto, sasabihin nila, nako, delikado na tayo kasi doon pa lang may melee na eh. Anong susunod? Magbabarilan na sila. So the fact that we got 2 years of respite, no? That tells you that it was effective. Pero ngayon siguro nakikita din natin yung limitation ng effectiveness na yan. Yung kumbaga diplomacy by denial, right? Yung, meron kami understanding pero hindi tayo klaro exactly ano yung understanding because I think there's nothing on paper, right? Precisely because it's a very sensitive issue. So, sinasabi ng mga opisyalis natin na wala tayong prior parang permission na hinihingi sa China. So, baka notification lang, hoy, andyan kami ha, wag kayong magulo or something like that. Baka ganun lang. Pero baka ang basa ng mga China is, the fact na meron silang notification mechanism, baka ibig sabihin niya, nare-recognize pa rin nila yung ating presence there, ating claims there, and also yung, basically, baka threaten talaga mga Pilipino. So, yun yung naging parang working compromise. The problem with the working compromise na may ambiguity is that it's open to change at any moment, especially when the bigger picture changes. Kaya kanina lang nagsimula ako dun sa anong big picture ngayon? 2 out of 3 superpowers in an active conflict. China na lang natira. So the worry I have is that some people in China are saying, this is our time to also push the envelope. And especially itong Pilipinas dahil tingin nila sa atin weak link sa mga US allies in the region kumpara sa mga Hapon, sa mga Australiano or Koreans, baka tayong ginagawa nilang testing ground. And that's why, again, I'm very worried about what's happening here. Having said that, we're the ASEAN chair this year. At sana ito, gagamitin natin itong oportunidad na yan to steer not only the conflict but the region towards a much more dialogue-based conversation. Because as we speak, lahat tayo, we're already suffering from the implication of first the Ukraine war and now the Iran war, which is going to affect us on fertilizer, agriculture, not only energy security. So sana magamit natin ng mabuti itong chairman privileges natin this year, no? But again, it's easier said than done. So I completely sympathize with DFA and folks in the government right now.
But I had a chance to talk to, the other day to Defense Secretary Gilbert Chodoro, and he doesn't seem very happy with whatever the DFA and China appear to have agreed to in 2024. In fact, I asked him specifically about this provisional agreement. I asked him, aren't you going to release details? What exactly did we agree to? And at the outset, sabi niya, wala yung provisional agreement na yan. Wala yan. Then it turns out that what he really meant was, wala kaming kinalaman dyan. Talking, of course, about the DND. Diba?
Yun nga, like, I don't want to go into the bureaucratic politics or alleged turfing or whatever is happening there. I don't think it's even healthy for us to even give an impression that our different agencies, relevant agencies, are divided on this issue, because that's precisely what the Chinese and our rivals in the West Philippines want to hear about. So I think it's very important that the president of Malacanang makes it clear that whatever seeming incongruity between the positions of the defense secretary or the foreign affairs secretary is not a reflection of bureaucratic politics or contestation, but it's a part of me, and if I'm going to write probably something on this in a scholarly manner. I think meron talagang iba lang yung philosophy talaga ng mga departments na yan, at saka iba yung pinanggalingan nila. Because if you look at the DFA, dinaanan nila si Digong, dinaanan nila, di ba, lahat silang napagdaanan nila lahat ng mga administration na yan. And somehow, from their perspective, they kept things on an even keel. Di ba? Even in panahon ni Duterte, there were many times things were getting out of control. And I think the DFA DFA can always claim that they kept things on an even keel, including they kept our arbitration case alive even when the president on multiple occasions said, talking about Duterte, obviously na piece of trash paper lang yan. So, yung philosophy ng DFA is governed by that experience. And sa kanilang palagay, they have been very successful keeping things on an even keel. Ako naman, again, I'll be very careful about this because, I want to be fair to all sides here. Feeling ko naman, ang nangyari kasi dun sa mga ibang ahensya, nung panahon ni Digong, sila yung ipit talaga. Nakita natin when it comes to Philippine Coast Guard, to Philippine Navy. I know for a fact that there were many of them who wanted to take a more assertive stance nung panahon ni Digong, but somehow the command from the very top was not, permissive enough for them to do what they wanted to do, which they felt was important reflection of their duty. So, baka talaga, this is the human side of certain agents you were saying. All of these years, hindi namin nagawa yung gusto namin gawin. Tapos ngayon, nag-transparency initiative kami, Philippine Coast Guard, Philippine Navy, we're risking our lives there. We're there at the very front line. We're not in some air-conditioned room having nice conversation. So dapat kami ang pakinggan. Kami ang may pag-intindi dun sa mga realities on the ground. So I think that's where you can see why there will be some genuine philosophical disagreement between folks in the defense and the folks in the foreign ministry.
Still something that Gilbert Chodoro spoke of last Wednesday. He said that we should not take what happened last Monday, yung pukpukan doon sa, near the BRP Sierra Madre, as an isolated incident. In fact, tinahitay niya he said that this should be viewed in light of, number one, yung Batanes controversy involving Chinese academics. Number two, yung AI video na nilabas ng China Daily. In fact, the phrase that he used was, it's a grand ploy or grand opera by China, and that's something that they really do now whenever there's some sort of conflict or friction within the Politburo. Like, for example, whenever there's a purge of certain members, and they have to, I suppose, do a smokescreen.
Well, I think ito hindi black box yan. Alam natin na expunge yung isang foreign minister nila from the records. 2 defense ministers sa kanila pinano, some top generals in the Central Military Commission ay na-purge. So this is not a black box. We know that there's some difficult transition happening within China, and obviously that always puts a pressure on them. Ang akin lang, I think hindi ito difference of strategic outlook. I think both DFA, DND, all of them want to make sure we protect our interests and China doesn't take away more from us from what they have done over the past decade. For instance, hindi nila fully, mag-build sila ng structure dyan sa Panatag Shoal or hindi tayo papaalisin dyan sa Baho de Masinloc. I think all will agree. The question is tactics. Probably, there are people in the DFA saying, ganito na lang, it is bad, agree kami, nakakatakot yung situation, but that's precisely why dapat sobrang ingat tayo and who knows if the condition is good enough, pumunta si Xi Jinping dito sa November for the next ASEAN Summit, then yun yung opportunity natin to come up with some sort of a long-term understanding na hindi lang memorandum of misunderstanding, hindi lang yung open to interpretation kind of a notification mechanism or non-mechanism, but something more concrete. And that theory is not totally crazy because we saw it. The Chinese are in a position, they always want to make a deal, right? But a deal that, of course, reflects their interest, or sometimes they can split the difference. But it's also very legitimate for other side, for people in the DND and the Coast Guard to say, what are you talking about, right? Like, these people, you cannot deal with them. They will use diplomacy just as a leverage, no, to push the envelope further and salami slice us. All of this, Ed, just shows how impossibly difficult our position is. And all of this shows why, for all the discussion about independent foreign policy, kailangan natin talaga yung mga aliado natin. Because for all of the criticism we may levy against the Americans or the limitations of our alliance, imagine what the Chinese could have done all this time if we didn't have that alliance. Imagine what China would have done if we didn't have various forms of support from other like-minded powers and countries, from Japan to Australia and the Europeans. So it's a very difficult situation, Ed. And to be honest, as someone who has been covering geopolitics for a very long time, has been writing so much on this, has been dealing with all sorts of thought leaders on this for a long time, I think we have to be humble enough to realize that we can have a legitimate debate on what is the best way to deal with China. As former foreign secretary and our current ambassador in New York, Ambassador Manalo, Foreign Secretary Manalo, told me last year, sabi na, ang isa sa mga pinaka-problema natin ngayon is, iba ang China. The China of 10 years ago is very different from China of today. So may mga tao nagsabi, ito yung gumana dati. Hindi nagagana yan because China is just growing militarily, economically, and technologically so fast. The sheer scale and speed of that is really troubling. And then add to that yung sinasabi ko, medyo black box din yung system nila, hindi transparent. So it's very hard for us to know what will really work with them. And that's why we can have a legitimate debate here without calling each other traitors or calling each other hawks or doves, right? I think both the ND and the DFA and the Coast Guard, all of them are trying their best here to deal with an impossibly difficult situation and dilemma. And I think this is where we also, the one thing I'm sure about is we have to leverage and double down, not only on our own military modernization, but also working with allies. On that, I'm quite certain. Hindi na radical uncertainty yan.
Okay. Since we already talked about at least in part Batanes, let me push the envelope as well in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. EDCA, of course. When you talk about Batanes, although you don't have an EDCA site there, but it's part of the EDCA, supposed EDCA envelope and the Taiwan issue. Now, yes, EDCA are Philippine bases. I talk about Philippine bases where we allow the U.S. to conduct operations in support of their operations, but it was never clear, and I wonder if this will ever, if this is a question that has been raised before. Can we require the U.S. to seek our permission if they do plan to use our bases to support any operations that they will be having in a conflict with Taiwan?
Right. I mean, just to make this very simple, the game in Taiwan is deterrence. Because once the war happens, Ed, I don't think there's time, oy, wag na kayo dumaan dyan, or bobombahin lahat ng mga, I mean, in the opening moments of any, God forbid, war, bobombahin ng China lahat ng mga bases na pwede gamitin ng mga Amerikano. From Guam to southern Japan to Philippines, even Singaporeans are wondering, oh, baka kami, madamay din kami. Again, because the reason why suddenly no one is very sure about how things are happening is because, again, panoorin mo yung ginagawa ng Iran. In fact, may new concept ngayon, it's called debasification. Hindi debasification, debasification. Yung ginagawa ng Iran na pinipinpoint na tinatarget lahat ng mga
US
logistical
bases in the
bases.
region.
Exactly. So actually ngayon, if you talk to
Because
any...
they're fixed targets. I mean, you can't hide them.
Exactly. And now you saw that a middle-sized country like Iran, not a superpower, not necessarily having the most advanced technology, by sheer volume. right? They were able to overwhelm a lot of these systems. So to be honest, I think as of now, everyone is just going back to the drawing board. Like, wait, ano bang mangyari dito? Obviously, the geography is different. Napakalapit nung southern Iran to the US bases. And yeah, we can talk about all the differences. But the difference also is China is so much bigger than Iran, so much more advanced than Iran. But at the same time, hindi naman tayo helpless. We're not helpless. The Japanese are very capable allies of US and the Americans. So actually, as we speak right now, no one is talking about yung Cold War era Subic kind of base. It's all about this kind of a lattice strategy kung saan US has access to key facilities for operational rapid response, for expeditionary response, no? Yung mga ganon. But the other side of this debate, of course, Ed, is can we put enough weapon systems, I don't know, HIMARS, Typhoon missile systems, Patriot, Expand, kung magagagawa tayo ng Great Wall of Missile Defense to deter China. But honestly, if the war happens, it's anyone's guess. Just look at how everyone seems to be surprised every 2 months by how things are turning out in Ukraine, in Iran. I think we are entering a new phase of warfare whereby a lot of assumptions are being reassessed. And that's why I very carefully follow, analysis from RUSI to RAND and all of that. And I think to IISS. And from my own humble assessment of the operational situation, I think lahat tayo nag-adjust based doon sa pinag-aaralan natin sa nangyari sa Iran and Ukraine because the rules of the game are changing operationally. So no, Ed, this is not a discussion about US bases. It's a discussion about ano ang mixture ng weapons deployments, right? And interoperability na pwede natin gawin para magdadalawang isip ng China. But the moment the war starts, Ed, it's anyone's guess. I think the past wars, since pandemic, since Ukraine and Iran, should really humble anyone about having a definitive assessment. Ito yung mangyari, hindi. Na ako,
But-
humble pa yun para sa akin.
But as we see in Iran versus the US, it easily becomes a war of attrition, in which case having 1, 2, or a dozen missile systems is not going to help you much if it's going to be a massive squadron of, for example, drones. Diba? So, where is that
No,
leave
I
us?
get your point. You're just saying, well, the Iranians have thousands of missiles and tens of thousands of drones.
And I can
Tayo kung
imagine
apat
China
lang.
too.
And China has 10 times that,
And
probably,
we're happy
right?
with, for example, 3 batteries of BrahMos, or, you're looking at...
No, I completely. That's what's always raised, right? Like, will this even matter? I think the reality is that it will only matter as part of a bigger piece of, as a piece of a bigger puzzle. Ano yung mga weapon systems na lalagay ng Taiwan, ng Japan, ng US sa Guam? So we're going to be part of that, but absolutely, we're not in a position to be the biggest part of that, except our geography. And probably this is a good place to end. Ed, the moment the Philippines tells the Americans, I'm not sure I want to help you or give you access to Taiwan if there's a war, then the US will say, what's the point of this alliance, right? Like, you want us to help you all this time. And then when we will really need you, and look at the simulation. In simulations, tens of thousands of American troops, if not hundreds of thousands, could get killed. And at the same time, the difference with the Iran and the Ukraine situation is that 2 nuclear power will be involved immediately. And it's also hard to predict. The reason I tell that is, Ed, I just did 3 war games, including one in Berlin just the other month. And shocking yung result. Like, in one, I cannot say more. Like, basically, I had to cut the deal because I wanted to save Filipinos, 250,000 of them in Taiwan. I mean, I cannot say more, but these are confidential war games. But I'm telling you, as we speak, a lot of experts are scratching their head. But the point here is we cannot be neutral. We really cannot be neutral. If you say you're not going to help the Americans, that's the end of our alliance. If you're going to say you're going to help the Americans, you have to make sure it's just good enough help that doesn't piss off the Chinese. But what is that level of help or involvement? It's very hard to figure that out. And I think that's why napakahirap yung situation natin. And to make this even more complicated, I'm sure in China there's also a debate. Is it even worth it to pick a fight with the Philippines right now? This president, he's already in his final year. Maybe we should be more involved in shaping
Maybe wait for the
outcomes in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And maybe once we get a good president in the Philippines, who should you worry about? Maybe there will not even be 2 HIMARS and 2 Typhoon missiles. And guess what? The Americans are also wondering about that. The Japanese are wondering about that. So in short, we are part of this game, but the degree to which we'll be part of this game, both on the operational and the political decision-making time, medyo gray zone din, medyo twilight zone din. And
That's
I
a
think
pretty good point there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wait, if you don't mind, just squeeze one more question. But this time, let me ask you to put on your hat as a political scientist, and let's talk about something more local. Today, the ombudsman, a panel of investigators from the ombudsman, filed a complaint for preliminary investigation against Speaker Martin Romualdez, also within the ombudsman. In other words, it's all within the same agency. Nagsampa ng kaso para mag-preliminary investigation sa loob mismo ng ombudsman. Coming in 1 year, almost exactly 1 year to the day the president said, mahiya lamang kayo, we haven't seen any major official getting jailed except for sino ba, Jingo Estrada and Manuel Bonoan.
Bong Revilla.
But Bong Revilla is already an ex-senator. Diba?
Yeah.
And you have, of course, Zaldico, who is abroad, so hindi umada rin kaso. Maliban doon, you just have a bunch of engineers from DPWH. Are you impressed with what's happening, or should people be impressed with what's happening with Martin Romualdez, especially today with the supposed filing of a complaint for preliminary investigation?
What is your point of reference? Because if your point of reference is the figurine, non-functioning ombudsman we had before, right, during Duterte time, then yes, we have made huge improvements. I mean, even a 0.5 contractor being in jail, as Ronald Llamas puts it, is way better than there's no investigation, nothing happening. Even if 2 or 3 senators put there, it's better than nothing was happening during Duterte time. But absolutely, when you give all of those promises last year pa lang, na by December this, maybe by March this, at ngayon, wala na, tapos ng May, mag-August na tayo, of course, people are gonna ask for follow-ups or something like that. Again, I don't wanna preempt what's happening there, but in theory, the problem for Marcos is, again, how to split the difference. He has to show just good enough level of transparency so that he has some degree of credibility and political capital. But if he goes all in, there could be a complete implosion of his political coalition and base.
Yeah.
And that could come to haunt him precisely when he enters his weakest moment in his twilight year in office. So it's really an impossible situation. That's why we were all scratching our head when in last SONA he said, you know, maya kayo, and essentially was signaling that something big will happen. Well, I was always asked, panindigan mo ba yan or hindi? Are you in a position to do that? And I think now we're realizing perhaps some people are getting cold feet and they're wondering how can they split the difference. And that's the challenge we have, because should his coalition implode, Ed, we know who's going to benefit the most. It's not the progressives, right? It's going to be the Dutertes, especially if Sara Duterte also comes out victorious from this impeachment. Plus, there's an implosion. Now, this is not a normative. I'm not saying this is what the president should do. I'm just trying to explain what could be. Baka misinterpret naman tayo. What I'm explaining from a political calculus, what an impossible situation also President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. also has here. So, yun nga, nasa gitna tayo ng multiple organ failure when it comes to our economy, energy, and everything. Can the president afford a complete implosion? Because it's also possible there'll be retribution. If he goes after some of these people very close to him, probably also know stuff.
His own cousin.
Yeah, and then it could get very ugly exactly when he's weakest. I mean, just to close on this, if you look at all the revolutions in human history, right? Of course, we're not in a revolution situation, but maybe not. The Tocqueville talked about it. He said, the Ancien regime, the status quo power is precisely in its weakest position when it signals openness, when it's not powerful anymore, because it will be interpreted as a sign of weakness, of desperation.
And remember,
so that's why.
Remember Romualdez's video message a couple of weeks ago, and he said something to the effect that parang I will not go down alone. So may mga parang
exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, you go down the road, maybe you'll get. And also the other question is, if credibility is the game, honestly, is a Marcos ever in a position to get really full credibility on good governance issue? Maybe it was not realistic even to begin with. So I think what the president could do, again, this is not a normative position, this is just a realpolitik kind of analysis. The best the president could do is just to admit, this is the best I could do, and this is a huge improvement from before, but I hope this will lay down the foundation for even more transformative change under my successor. Is that too humble a positioning, too self-deprecating? I don't know, but that's much better than the president coming out making big promises and then realizing, teka, di ba? Ito yung teka moment, di ba? Wait lang, pag ginawa ko to, wala nang matitira, di ba? And because the vultures are already hovering around the president. is he in that position? Because let's say he goes after Congress. The next question will be, oh, what about your cabinet members, right? What about them, right? And where is this going to stop? I'm not saying he shouldn't do it. I'm just saying this is the impossible situation the president also finds himself in, and somehow he has himself to blame.
Okay, I'd like to say thank you for allowing us to take up so much of your time. Maraming salamat kay Richard Heydarian, geopolitical analyst, and of course, our political scientist.
Certain says, I love hearing my voice. I thought it's going to be a 5 minutes conversation. And then I got you, Ed. So sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, thank you, Richard. You are watching The Big Story on One News. When we return, we revisit a team from the Ombudsman conducting an initial probe into former Speaker Martin Romualdez over charges of plunder and bribery, among others. The details next. Please keep it here. Welcome back to The Big Story. A special panel of investigators from the Ombudsman has filed a 104-page complaint for preliminary investigation against former Speaker Martin Romualdez. The complaint outlines severe allegations or several allegations of plunder, direct and indirect bribery, graft, and money laundering tied to a massive flood control scandal. Also named as respondents are former Ako Bicol Party List Congressman Zaldico and several others. The document details supposed deliveries of cash-filled suitcases, codenamed Basura, brought by convoys to luxury residences associated with Romualdez. Investigators allege that simulated foreign exchange dealings were registered through shell companies to launder extra kickbacks into prime real estate and corporate shares. On Storycon this afternoon, former NBI Director Jaime Santiago, himself a former judge, clarifies what makes this new ruling or new filing different from the previous investigation into Romualdez and others. For his part, former IBB President Domingo Cayosa believes that including testimonial evidence strengthens the case.
Conduct ng preliminary investigation, ang quantum of proof na re-require na ngayon ay prima facie evidence with certainty of guilt. Yun una pong ginawa ng ombudsman ay case build up. Ayun nga po, fact finding. Pagka meron na sila kompleto, isasampan na nila yan for preliminary investigation. At mas matindi nga ho yun. Bibigyan na ng pagkakataon, ibig sabihin meron na silang prima facie evidence laban kay Speaker.
Recommendation that Secretary Bonoan be dropped from the as an accused and become a state witness, mabilis-bilis na sana. Wala na sanang rason na tumagal pa because he would be the best person who can testify because sakop niya ang buong DPWH.
In response, Romualdez' spokesperson, Attorney Elaine Atienza, says the late congressman is ready to confront all the charges. Atienza expresses confidence that a fair judgment based strictly on evidence will vindicate Romualdez. She also urges the public to let the legal process prevail. And here are the other stories making headlines this Friday from our mobile journalist Danielle Dayao.
Motorists should brace for another hike in pump prices on Tuesday, July 28, or just a day after President Marcos's SONA. The Department of Energy is estimating diesel prices to rise by 6 to 7 pesos per liter, gasoline by 5 to 6 pesos, and kerosene by 3 to 4 pesos. The figures are based on 4 days of trading at the Mine of Platts, Singapore. Brent crude has also breached the $100 a barrel mark. With this, prices at the pump may continue to rise.
Ang naging trend ho this week, araw-araw pa-increase ho ang movement sa international price sa Mine of Platts, Singapore. Kaya baka asahan na rin natin, baka tumaas pa.
The threat of escalating pump prices has the LTFRB studying petitions for fare hikes once again. Another option is higher fuel discounts for PUB drivers. But for some drivers, these solutions are not enough to cushion the impact of the oil price surge.
Hindi po ako pabor doon. Bakit po? Lahat magsisuffer eh. Kasi miski kami, mga driver, apektado din po doon sa taas pamasahe. Eh siyempre, nagsasakay yung pamilya namin, yung mga anak namin. Lahat po yan. Lahat bigat tataas.
Yung sabi nila ang 5 piso, dadagdag maggagawing 15. Hindi pa rin sasapat kasi sa laki ng tinas. Kung piso lang itataas nila, halos tabla-tabla pa rin yung laban.
Meantime, Senator Ping Lacson claims he has new damning evidence over alleged ghost flood control projects in Taguig. The bailiwick of Senate Minority Leader Alan Peter Cayetano. He even took a potshot at his colleague, quote, kung merong shoot sa balde, merong din shoot sa kaldero. A reference to the controversial and pricey cauldron during the 2019 SEA Games. Cayetano was head of the SEA Games Organizing Committee. Senate Blue Ribbon Committee Chair Erwin Tulfo says investigation over corruption will not only revolve around Cayetano.
Hindi pa niya nasasubmit pero pag sinubmit siguro then I will start reviewing it. Hindi lang po naka-confine doon. Yung mga sinasabi po nung 18 mga bodyguard, they dared us na imbitahan sila so we will be inviting them.
Senator Robin Padilla has a fighting chance to be the next vice president of the country if elections were held today. That's according to one of his staunchest allies. Attorney Sal Panelo also has a fearless forecast. Padilla is next to be president.
Pinupush ko si Robin na maging vice president. Pag si Robin ay nanalong vice president, I'm sure he will win together with Inday Sara. Siya ang susunod kay Inday Sara ang presidente.
This is the big story on One News coming up. The Philippine peso takes another beating and falls into another historic low. The details when we return.
I will make sure that people know all of the things that we have done to navigate this very difficult period in our history where we are buffeted by all of these external forces. But nonetheless, our response has been good, and we have had to make adjustments, but those adjustments have been effective and have served their purpose, and I know that it has helped people weather this storm and continue to weather this storm until things hopefully normalize. So, abangan ang susunod na kabanata.
You're still watching The Big Story. The Philippine peso sinks to yet another record low. The currency dropped nearly 10 centavos today to settle at 61.847 against the U.S. greenback. This comes as crude prices continue to surge in international markets over escalating tensions in the Middle East. The peso is one of Asia's worst performing currencies, losing about 5% this year. July 24's close surpassed the previous record low of 61.75 against the US dollar seen on May 18, July 22, and July 23. Some analysts expect the peso to drop below the 62 per dollar level in the near term due to a return to geopolitical risks, higher energy prices, and broad dollar strength. The Philippines is one of 60 countries facing new tariffs from the U.S. over its supposed failure to curb forced labor. Philippine exports to the U.S. will be charged a 12.5% tariff after the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative found that Manila, and we quote, failed to impose and effectively enforce a forced labor import prohibition. The new tariffs will take effect on Tuesday, July 28. Exempted from the tariffs are semiconductor, agricultural, and raw mineral exports. The move is U.S. President Donald Trump's latest effort to restore his tariff regime after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down his reciprocal duties back in February. Trump is using Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 to levy new tariffs by penalizing foreign countries who violate trade agreements or who engage in unreasonable and discriminatory policies that burden U.S. commerce. The new levies come just as Trump and President Marcos talked over the phone last night to discuss geopolitical and economic challenges facing Manila and Washington. For a business official, the latest tariff may soon have an impact on Filipino consumers.
Immediately, we have to watch and see both the exporters and both the importers from the U.S. ano ang talaga interpretation at ano talaga yung final determination bago sila mag-produce or bago mag-import. No? So magkakaroon siguro ng disruption immediately, pero we don't really know if it will be bad or good or worse than where we are now.
And on to the weather. Quiapo intensified into a severe tropical storm even after it made landfall over Camiguin this afternoon. As of 8 p.m., the eye of Quiapo is still over the coastal waters of Calayan, Cagayan. Signal number 3 is up over the western portion of the Babuyan Islands. Under signal number 2, there is Batanes, the rest of the Babuyan Islands, and the northern portions of mainland Cagayan, Apayao, and Ilocos Norte. Areas under signal number 1 are the rest of mainland Cagayan, Apayao, and the Ilocos provinces, the northern and central portions of Aurora, as well as Isabela, Quirino, Nueva Vizcaya, Abra, Kalinga, Mountain Province, Ifugao, and La Union. Pag-asa's forecast track shows Quiapo exiting the Philippine area of responsibility later tonight or tomorrow morning. But as it heads over the West Philippine Sea, it may rapidly intensify into a typhoon and continue to trigger the southwest monsoon or the habagat, bringing strong to gale force gusts over most of Luzon and parts of the Visayas and Mindanao until the weekend. Cagayan, under signal number 2, experienced mostly cloudy skies and occasionally heavy rains for the most part of Friday. However, Benguet, which was under signal number 1 earlier, experienced landslides due to incessant rainfall since last night. Metro Manila is not under any wind signal, but habagat rains caused flooding in some areas in Quezon City and in Manila. Over in Antique, floodwaters rose by a few feet. Some families had to be rescued by the Philippine Coast Guard. In Iloilo, flooding was chest deep in at least 30 barangays. Over in Guimaras, some families also needed to be rescued after a flash flood in their area. And in Cebu, gutter deep flooding was recorded with public works personnel clearing drainages. Free rides were also provided for affected commuters. Over in Mindanao, particularly in Sarangani, rivers swelled, causing houses along banks to collapse and be washed away by the waters. In General Santos City, a man suddenly jumped into the raging flood waters. Fortunately, he was able to float into safety. In Bukidnon, the stormy weather even caused an accident, a truck slipping out of a bridge. The three on board were fortunately rescued but were wounded. Rising waters and expanding cities are forcing authorities to rethink how the country handles severe floods. Instead of just managing disasters as they happen, specialists are demanding a comprehensive blueprint that covers entire river systems from start to finish. The details of this new strategy from Mobile Journal, Denise Valdez-Sancho.
Government officials, engineers, urban planners, and international experts gathered in Makati City for the Stormwater Summit 2026 to discuss long-term solutions to flooding amid climate change, rapid urbanization, and growing pressure on the country's water infrastructure.
Too often, it receives the greatest attention only after disasters occur. Today's summit provides an opportunity to shift our focus towards preparedness, risk-informed planning, innovation, and long-term sustainability for our communities.
Presidential Advisor for Sustainable and Resilient Communities, Secretary Cristina Garcia Frasco said the country must shift from reacting to disasters toward investing in preparedness, risk-informed planning, and stronger coordination among government, the private sector, and local communities.
For many years, our main approach to flooding was simple. Remove the water as quickly as possible. Flooding is a basin-wide problem, and we cannot solve it by relying on pumps and drainage systems alone. Containment asks a different question. Not how fast can we flush it, but how much can we hold it and what it can do for us.
During the panel discussion, Kalima identified 3 key interventions the Philippines must prioritize over the next 5 years to reduce flooding: rehabilitating heavily silted waterways, developing more upstream flood control and water storage infrastructure, and strengthening proper waste management.
First, we have to address our waterways, and then I think the third one and the most important one is proper waste management. Because even if we do all of this, if people keep throwing garbage in the rivers and our waterways, it's useless.
Looking ahead, officials said future flood mitigation efforts will focus on basin-wide planning, expanding upstream water storage and retention infrastructure, adopting science-based solutions, and strengthening coordination among national agencies, local governments, the private sector, and communities to build a more flood-resilient Philippines. Mobile journalist Denise Valdez-Sancho. We are One News.
And before we go, join us for the 5th State of the Nation address of President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. Our whole-day coverage happens on Monday, July 27, 2026. We will have the latest developments, expert analyses, and real-time reports before and after the SONA on One News and other Kapatid channels. Do stay tuned for that. And those are the big stories this week. I'm Ed Lingao. Kapatid, we are One News, your side, all the time. Good night and have a restful weekend.